many of you are on your period right now? I can see heads turning, looking down. Now isn't the time to tune out. I do understand the reaction. After all, this is a very private matter. But why? Why should something as normal and essential as menstruation be shrouded in silence? This isn't just a women's problem. It's a human problem, despite gender and across generations. Are you feeling a little awkward? Uncomfortable? Good. That reaction is exactly what we need to talk about. Half of our human population experiences periods. In fact, the United Nations Population Fund tells us that 800 million people are on their period today. But that's probably not something you would choose to share. It's not exactly dinner table conversation, is it? Growing up in the 21st century, I've had the women in my life conceal this crimson curse. Such a secretive matter from the moment it began. And we do go to some extraordinary measures to not even say the word period. The Blob. Shark Week. Girl Flu. Code Red. And potentially the most creative I have heard, explosive pum-pum time. I'd like you to think back, those of you in the room who have periods. Do you remember when you started menstruating? I believe many of us would associate periods with preteen, maybe 12 years old. Some of you may have been older, some may be younger. In my case, I was 4 years younger. At 8 years old, I started my period. I was in year 3. It was a terrifying and, quite frankly, traumatizing experience. I had never been told what a period was, so I thought I was going to die. I'd learned to associate blood with trauma, and I knew it was always a bad sign, so I panicked. Not knowing what to do, stuck in those junior school toilets we'd only just moved up to in year 3, so I couldn't put my feet on the ground. I knew I had to get back to the classroom, worried my teacher was going to shout at me for being too long. Yet tears were streaming down my face because this blood must be bad. It wasn't long after the stomach pain began and I was sat hunched over on the toilet in too much pain for my small body to handle at that age. Now I know what you're thinking. 8 years old, that's extremely young, isn't it? And you're right, it is. But it is in the healthy limits for a child to start their period. However, in May 2024, period education was proposed to be banned until year 5, 9 and 10 years old, under the new draft guidance of the sex education plan. Banned. Strong word, isn't it? What is so inappropriate about periods? About a girl understanding the expected changes that will happen to her body, that the topic itself cannot be brought up despite many starting before that time. I didn't learn all that much about periods in my 15 years of education. 10 of them I had periods for. 15 years on from my first period, and lessons still have not been learnt from the girls that went home from school crying to their parents, thinking they were going to die. When I was in school, the period chart came under PSHE, Personal, Social, Health and Economic Education. But we all just referred to it as sex ed. And yes, Periods came under the sex education bracket. But I propose that this is part of the cause of the stigma and the sexual objectification in itself. And we really have to separate periods and sex, especially in the education setting. As a teenager, I was taught how to use a condom on 3 separate occasions. But no one ever taught me how to use a tampon or any period products, for that matter. Quite an alarming gender education gap there, wouldn't you agree? One where a girl's sex education is more focused on contact with the opposite gender than her own body. My friends and I now joke and laugh about waddling awkwardly like penguins the first time we'd inserted tampons incorrectly. I'd gone swimming with my dad and had unexpectedly started. I was too embarrassed to say to him, so I went to go buy tampons because I didn't want to miss out on the fun. I stood in the shop with an array of brands, sizes, colours and scents being sold to me, and ended up buying the heaviest flow and biggest tampons available. I used a YouTube video in the changing rooms of how to put it in me. It wasn't a great experience. I was 14 years old. By this point, I had been taught how to use a condom, but not a tampon. I remember in school when the instruction manual was removed from my box of tampons just in case the boys got hold of it, implying that the sexual nature of these anatomical diagrams of how to safely use tampons was a bigger concern than the safety of my physical well-being. These period products were provided under a free period product scheme, mainly for disadvantaged and underserved school pupils, with potential of negative hygiene practice, infections, and even toxic shock syndrome from using products like tampons for too long. You would have assumed that this would be a priority for girls' health and not a potential pornographic exposure. We leave open a large gap for myths and misconceptions to be perceived as reality and passed down through generations. A misconception I hear all the time is around the use of tampons taking away virginity, which in itself is an extremely complicated social and cultural construct, but it is damaging to the right for us to have the correct information about our bodies. The use of tampons has nothing to do with virginity. And educating about these topics means that we can reduce and even end this cycle of misinformation. On the flip side of all this, where and when did the fascination of periods in a sexual light be inflicted onto the boys? It's hard to blame them being curious to a certain extent when we deny them the correct information of what periods are and what they really mean. They'd see the girls be taken into a separate room for a quick girls' talk. They come out horrified, and they're told not to talk about what came up in that room on the playground afterwards. Automatically, those of us in that room think that what came up is wrong to talk about, and we're embarrassed. And this only made the boys even more curious. See, we're identifying a cycle, and not one that just makes this a girl's issue. I truly believe that the sexual connotations we have around periods are adding to this cycle of objectifying a woman's body, except now, it's a girl's body. It sounds so wrong, linking sex to first periods, doesn't it? In my case, we're talking about linking sex to an 8-year-old child. But that is what is happening. Of course you wouldn't teach an 8-year-old about sex, but I don't understand why we wouldn't teach them about periods and the normal changes that will happen to their bodies. And I'm not talking about the science and getting a 3D pelvis out, but more that big sister-like chat so that when these changes do happen to them, they don't scare them. In my time in sex ed, I was taught about condom use, recycling, consent, and drug and alcohol use. When I was 13 years old, I was taught how to use a condom properly for the first time. No one taught me how to use a tampon or any period products before leaving education at 18 years old. Why do we learn about condoms and how to use them properly? For our health and safety. And so we have to learn about periods and what these changes in our body are supposed to look like. Without this education around periods, we don't know our normal. We are deprived of the opportunity to help ourselves live the same quality of life on our periods as we do off. In order to be and stay healthy, we have to establish what is okay and what isn't. Period pain, it's very common, so it must be normal, right? As with heavy periods, very common, must be normal. This is just what we call the joys of being a woman. It's normal for a girl to miss up to a week off school every month, vomiting, passing out, scared to leave her house because she seems to leak through every pad and tampon available. Right? This is how I live my life on my period, and I know I'm not the only one. The charity Wellbeing of Women's December 2023 study of 3,001 12 to 18-year-olds revealed that 97% experience painful periods. 92% have such heavy periods that they have to change their daily activities. Chronic menstrual conditions are seen as just a period. The charity Endometriosis UK documents the average diagnosis time for endometriosis in the UK as 8 years and 10 months. The 2024 survey of more than 4,000 people with the condition revealed that almost half visited their GP 10 times or more before being diagnosed. Period inequity is quite literally taking away the right to a young person's education. PHS Group, our leading provider for hygiene services in the UK, documents in October 2023 that an average of 3 days per term is missed of school because of periods. That's more than the common cold. My last intention is to make anyone feel uncomfortable. But we're all deeply ingrained with this fear-like perception of menstruation. Women and people in the room who have periods, stop hiding it. Paint the realities of menstruation to people around you. It will probably make your lives easier. And men, it's blood. We see an abundance of it in traumatic ways on television. So we can start to accept that menstruation is normal. And it's actually played an essential part of why we are all able to sit here today. I still cannot believe that it wasn't until 2016 an actual period pad was shown on television. And it took until 2017 for red and not blue liquid to represent periods. Periods are not a weakness. What do you mean? I get to bleed for a week, every month, and not die? How awesome is that? I do wish someone had painted it to me as that strength when I was that scared 8-year-old girl. Periods include us all. And if we continue to treat them as something that should be whispered about or ignored, then we miss out on the opportunity to normalize them, to educate properly, and to remove the stigma for the 8-year-old girl that's about to start her period. prioritising her equality over our discomfort.